Welcome, dear listener, to a tale where beauty wasn't just a mirror's promise, it was a dangerous obsession. Tonight, I invite you into a world where the pursuit of beauty was not gentle or fleeting, but relentless, merciless, and soaked in the shadows of history. It is a world where the line between life and death was blurred not just by sickness or war, but by powders, poisons, and rituals that could turn even the simplest reflection into a haunting reminder of what people were willing to sacrifice for appearance. Settle in with me, for this is not the story of shining crowns and jeweled gowns alone. It is also the story of bodies bent under impossible ideals and of faces painted to look less like life and more like the pale mask of eternity. The medieval world was not kind to those who did not fit its vision of beauty. Imagine a time when looking healthy was not the goal at all. Quite the opposite. To look truly beautiful was to look as though you had already been claimed by the grave. Pale skin, hollow cheeks, fragile frames that seemed as though a single gust of wind might carry them away. In this dim, candlelit past, beauty meant fragility, and fragility meant power. What a strange thought, isn't it? That the more ghostly and spectral you appeared, the more society revered you. But this adoration came at a cost. To be beautiful was to risk everything. Your health, your status, even your soul. The choices that women and men made in the name of appearance carried real danger, and every pale cheek or carefully sculpted brow was earned through pain. Tonight, you and I will step into that world together, and as you listen, I invite you to think of where you are right now. Tell me, where are you tonight, and what hour keeps you company? Are you tucked into your bed, the lights fading around you? Or are you listening with only the soft glow of a screen to guide you? Wherever you are, let this story be your companion, a whisper from the past to carry you into rest. If you can, dim the lights, find a quiet corner, or settle deeper beneath your blankets. Let the world around you fade into stillness, and imagine instead the flicker of a single candle in a stone-walled chamber. Its light trembles against tapestries that hang heavy with dust, against wooden beams blackened with age. The air is cold, touched with the faint smell of smoke and something damp. It is here, in this hushed and eerie space, that the story begins. Before you stands a mirror, not the bright glass you know today, but a sheet of tarnished silver, its reflection dull and uneven. You gaze into it, and the face that stares back at you is both familiar and strange. Your own, yet already being judged by a world centuries removed from your own. The mirror does not flatter, it reveals. You notice the color in your cheeks, the life in your eyes, and you realize that in this time, such signs of health are not a blessing, but a flaw. Pale skin, veins like threads of blue beneath the surface, a complexion untouched by sun or labor. These are what mark the noble and the beautiful. So you linger, eyes fixed upon the reflection, the dim light framing your features. The chamber is silent except for the faint hiss of the candle. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls the hour, marking your entry into this strange, brutal world of medieval beauty. You take one last steadying breath, gaze locked upon the cold surface of the mirror, and prepare to learn just how far people would go to chase this pale and deadly ideal. You lean closer to the tarnished mirror, its uneven surface catching the dim candlelight. What you see unsettles you. There is color in your cheeks, the faint warmth of life pulsing beneath your skin. In the medieval world, this is no gift. It is a betrayal. That healthy flush you carry would have marked you not as noble but as common, proof that you labored outdoors, that the sun had dared to touch you. In this chamber, in this century, beauty is measured not by the glow of health, but by the absence of it. A flush of color meant you toiled in fields, a peasant's curse. Nobility demanded skin like moonlight, veins threading delicate blue beneath a surface so pale it seemed translucent. To look alive was a flaw, to look half dead was perfection. And so the pursuit of pallor became a dangerous ritual, one that demanded patience, pain, and poison in equal measure. There were many paths to that ghostly complexion. Some chose seclusion, hiding themselves away from sunlight as though the very sky were their enemy. Curtains drawn, hoods pulled low, hands covered even in gardens. Others relied on bloodletting, the physician's leeches placed with care at the temples or behind the ears. Each slow sip drained not just blood, but the vitality that might dare to brighten the cheeks. Imagine lying still as the creatures clung to your flesh, their work leaving you weak, faint, and fashionably pale. And then there were the pastes, those powders mixed in secret by trembling hands. Chalk ground fine, blended with vinegar or egg whites, pressed into the skin until the face took on the brittle sheen of porcelain. Some recipes whispered of arsenic, its ghostly whiteness unmatched. Each layer promised purity, yet beneath it the skin burned, blistered, and betrayed the truth. That beauty was nothing less than a quiet poisoning. Consider Lady Margaret of Anjou, her ivory complexion the envy of courts across Europe. In portraits, her face is an unbroken field of pale perfection, her cheeks untouched by even the faintest warmth. Artists captured her as though she were carved from alabaster, a queen sculpted into a vision of virtue. Yet how much of that perfection was paint, and how much was the cost of hours spent away from the sun, of powders pressed into the skin with merciless devotion? Her beauty was a triumph, but also a mask, one maintained by sacrifice. The irony is sharp, almost cruel. You smeared poison to look pure. Each application, each careful stroke of powder was meant to conceal life itself. The closer you came to death, the more beautiful you appeared. And those around you praised it, admired it, perhaps even envied it, never pausing to consider that the beauty they adored was also a slow undoing. Now, in the silence of your chamber, you reach for the small jar left on the table. Its contents sting your nose even before your fingers touch it. You scoop a thin layer of the chalky paste, spreading it carefully across your skin. The burn is immediate, sharp, but as you lean once more toward the mirror, you see what they saw: a face drained of warmth, ghostly and spectral. The reflection is no longer entirely your own, but one shaped by centuries of obsession. And as the sting deepens, you cannot help but wonder what further rituals await to strip life away in the name of beauty. You sit in the chamber, the heavy silence broken only by the low growl of your stomach. A maid hovers near, offering a small bowl of broth, the steam curling upward like a gentle invitation. But you shake your head, pushing it away. Hunger is not your enemy. It is your sculptor. Each pang, each hollow ache, is another chisel stroke carving your face into the shape of beauty. In this world, hollow cheeks were not a sign of sickness or hardship, but of refinement. To look gaunt, to carry shadows beneath your bones, was to declare that you were too noble, too pious, too elevated to need the fullness of bread or the blush of health. Wealth meant you could refuse what others craved. Piety meant you turned away from earthly pleasures. Either way, the result was the same: a face sharpened by absence, celebrated for looking less alive. There were tricks, of course. If fasting alone did not hollow the flesh, acidic rubs offered assistance. Pomegranate juice, tart and biting, was massaged into the skin to thin it, to irritate and inflame until the face took on the hollow, reddened edges of suffering. Beauty was not in the comfort of plenty, but in the visible cost of deprivation. And so, a woman might sit before her mirror with cheeks stinging, stomach aching, and heart fluttering faintly, yet she would be praised for her devotion to the ideal. In Castile, noblewomen were known to fast for days before great feasts. The irony was bitter: tables groaning with roasted meats, golden loaves, and sweet-spiced wines, yet the most admired faces at the gathering belonged not to those who ate, but to those who refused. Their gauntness was a badge of honor, their visible weakness mistaken for grace. To watch them raise a goblet of wine and only wet their lips, to see them toy with food but never taste, it was a performance of beauty, rehearsed and perfected. And you sitting here feel the weight of that same performance. Your cheeks ache, the skin pulled tight over bone. Your vision blurs for a moment as the candlelight swims and your body cries out for nourishment. But when you glance at the mirror, you see what they would see. The plump softness has vanished, leaving behind an ethereal contour, a look that seems touched by otherworldly fragility. It is the very image they crave, though it feels more like a punishment than a prize. How strange, then, to know that outside these walls, the peasants in the fields wore the very look your class despised. They bent beneath the sun, their bodies full of strength, their faces round and colored by wind and work. Their cheeks were rosy with health, their skin darkened by labor, their laughter filled with the energy of bread and wine honestly earned. Yet those same signs of vigor, so natural and so alive, were scorned as vulgar, a scandal to the elite. What the peasants could not avoid, the nobles feared. What the peasants had in abundance, the nobles carved away with hunger. Lightheaded now, your limbs heavy and uncertain, you rise from your seat. The air feels cooler than before, sharper, as though it too wishes to press against your fragile frame. You step slowly toward the door, each movement deliberate, and cross into the corridor beyond. There, your wavering gaze catches a peculiar sight. A noble woman reclining with a cloth over her face, attendants gathered around. When the cloth is lifted, you glimpse the glistening trail of leeches, their swollen bodies pulling away from her pale skin, and you realize, with a shiver, that hunger was only the beginning of this cruel pursuit of beauty. You pause in the corridor, your breath catching at the sight before you. A noble woman reclines on a cushioned chair, her face tilted slightly upward as though she were awaiting a painter's careful hand. But the figures bending over her are not artists. They are healers, their bowls glinting in the candlelight, and what they place upon her cheeks are not brushes but leeches. The creatures squirm and latch with a wet insistence, clinging as though they had found a feast. She does not cry out, though her knuckles whiten as she grips the armrest. They cling, promising purity through pain. The belief was simple, if strange. Leeches drew out impurities, pulling away the corrupt humors that darkened the complexion. Each bite was thought to lighten the skin, to refine the face into something more delicate, more ethereal. In a world obsessed with pallor, the leech was both instrument and artist. The blood it drained was the very color that society despised, and so the noble submitted, trusting that the price of pain was worth the prize of beauty. In Florence, Lady Beatrice was whispered about for her devotion to this practice. Each week, her attendants prepared the ritual, pressing the leeches carefully along her jaw, her temples, her cheeks. By the time they dropped away, bloated and heavy, her face bore the faint constellation of wounds, small red marks that took days to fade. Yet when she stepped into court, she was praised for her purity, for the alabaster glow of her skin. Behind the admiration lay the scars, a map of sacrifice that only the closest attendants ever saw. Did it work? Perhaps, in its way. Skin drained of color, weakened by the loss of blood, certainly carried the pale sheen that the age demanded. But did it hurt? Undeniably. Each sharp pinch lingered, each slow pull of blood a reminder that beauty was bought not with ease, but with endurance. And still they came week after week to lie beneath the weight of the leeches, to exchange vitality for vanity. You cannot help but let a flicker of irony slip through your thoughts. Here were women of wealth and privilege, surrounded by tapestries and jewels, yet reduced to the stillness of bait as small creatures fed upon them. Nobility clung to leeches as tightly as the leeches clung to them. It was grotesque, almost absurd, and yet in this world, it was considered refinement. When the creatures are finally lifted, the noble woman reclines once more, her face dotted with faint wounds. But you know what will happen next. In time, when an artist paints her likeness, none of these scars will appear. Painters ignored the marks, crafting instead a face of flawless serenity, unmarred by the violence done in the name of beauty. The brush told a kinder lie, smoothing away what reality could not conceal. As you step further down the corridor, you pass a painting hanging in a gilded frame. The noble woman gazes out from the canvas, her skin smooth as ivory, her features serene and untouched. Not a blemish, not a scar, not a hint of the creatures that had once clung to her flesh. She is flawless, yet unreal, a vision shaped more by art than by life. And it is here, standing before this painted perfection, that you begin to see how art itself became complicit in defining and distorting the standards of beauty. You pause in the corridor, drawn toward a tapestry that stretches across the stone wall. Its woven threads shimmer faintly in the flickering candlelight, colors preserved by care and time. A lady gazes back at you from the fabric, her face serene, her features impossibly smooth. Her eyes are wide and calm, her cheeks pale yet glowing, her lips arranged in a soft, eternal half-smile. She looks less like a person and more like a vision, suspended between dream and divinity. A lady gazes back, her face a dream no one could live. In the medieval world, art did more than decorate halls. It dictated ideals. Paintings, tapestries, illuminated manuscripts. All these works whispered the same message. Women were shown with elongated necks, impossibly high foreheads, delicate jaws, and expressions that never broke into anger or laughter. They were cast as serene, untouched, unchanging. The brush and the loom were not neutral tools. They were architects of beauty itself, laying down standards that flesh could never sustain. Consider the celebrated tapestries of Lady Eleanor of Toledo. There she appears regal, graceful, draped in embroidered silks. Her face is still, her skin flawless, her presence monumental. But look closely. Not a wrinkle, not a crease, not even the faintest sign of humanity touches her expression. She is a statue disguised as a woman, a figure preserved for admiration but robbed of breath. The artistry is breathtaking, yes, but the humanity is absent. It is easy standing here to be awed by the skill of these artisans. Their hands shaped threads and pigments into illusions so convincing they outlasted centuries. Yet the awe is tinged with unease. These faces are not truthful. They are aspirational lies. Real women sweated beneath heavy gowns. Real women bled each month, bore children, suffered illness, and carried scars from both body and life. None of that found its way into the art. Instead, the loom and the brush smoothed it all away, leaving behind only saintly perfection. The disconnect was cruel. To gaze upon these images was to be reminded daily of the distance between flesh and fantasy. If your face did not match the portraits, if your skin was too flushed or your brow too low, the whispers began. A court could be merciless in its gossip, tearing at reputations with the same sharpness as any blade. It was not enough to be noble in birth or kind in spirit. Your appearance had to echo the impossible standards frozen in thread and paint. You linger before the tapestry, feeling both admiration and frustration. Admiration for the artistry, frustration at the tyranny it imposed. These woven faces glowed like saints, but they demanded real women diminish themselves to chase the illusion, and the cost of falling short was not just private disappointment, it was public judgment. As you step away, voices drift from the hall beyond. Two courtiers lean close, their tones hushed but urgent. You catch a phrase, too dark, disgraceful, and your ears sharpen. They are speaking of a noble woman, her skin bronzed by the sun. The words drip with scandal, with disapproval, with the threat of social ruin. And you realize, as you move toward the sound, that beauty here was not only an illusion woven by art, but a weapon wielded by society. From the dim corridor, you drift closer to the sound of hushed voices. Two courtiers stand at the edge of the hall, their heads bent together, their words meant to vanish into whispers, but sharp enough to pierce the still air. "She's too dark," one murmurs, his tone laced with disapproval. "Has she been outdoors like a commoner?" The other titters softly, though her eyes dart about to be sure no one else hears. Their scandal hangs in the air like smoke. In this world, a sun-kissed glow was not the badge of leisure it would one day become. It was a curse, a mark of labor, a sign that your place was in the fields rather than in the halls of power. Tanned skin meant exposure, toil, and sweat. It meant you were closer to the peasants who bent beneath the sun than to the nobles who cloaked themselves in shade. Pale skin whispered of purity, refinement, a life spent within cool stone walls. Bronze whispered of earth and work, of hands unfit to clasp jeweled goblets or sign noble treaties. The stories of court are filled with warnings. Lady Isabella of Aragon once returned from a hunt with her skin kissed too long by the sun. At first it was a curiosity, a murmur about her complexion, but whispers grew into judgment. Courtiers noted how her alliances faltered, how the king himself seemed reluctant to parade her before foreign guests. Her bronzed face had become more than a change in color. It was a scandal, a subtle undoing of her reputation. One slip into sunlight was all it took for admiration to curdle into mockery. You stand listening, and the weight of it presses against you. To have your worth balanced so precariously on the shade of your skin is a burden beyond reason. Yet here it is, the law of perception. A darkened face could ruin alliances, hinting at scandalous secrets or sins unspoken. Some whispered that bronzed skin meant more than labor. It hinted at impropriety, at times spent in places or with people best avoided. A tan could unravel not just beauty, but virtue itself. The realization tightens inside you, pulling your shoulders inward. You glance toward a polished surface, a silver pitcher set upon a table, and tilt it until your reflection bends back at you. The flicker of candlelight makes it hard to tell, but you lean closer, searching for betrayal. Has the sun touched you? Has some faint warmth dared to color your cheeks? Anxiety prickles beneath your skin. You pray that what you see is still pale enough, still delicate enough to pass the silent judgment of the court. And yet, even as you look, you know how fragile this safety is. One day in the wrong light, one ride through the countryside without a veil, and your reflection could shift from noble to scandalous. That is the weight of beauty here. One shade too far, and the world redraws you as something less. You pull back from the pitcher, heart unsteady. Around you, the gossip swells and fades, each word another reminder that appearances are a battlefield. And as you turn away, one thought presses forward with sharp clarity. If your reflection cannot betray you with color, then perhaps it can betray you with shape. You lift your hand instinctively toward your brows, remembering the ritual that so many endure, plucking them away until the face becomes a holy mask. You sit by the window, the faint light of a dying candle flickering against the stone wall, and feel the sharp tug of pain as your maid pulls another hair from your brow. You wince, your eyes watering against your will, but you do not tell her to stop. Each hair stings, but in this world, expression is a sin. Every tug is another step toward a face that is not yours, but one that society has decided is closer to heaven. The trend is strange, almost absurd, yet it reigns with unchallenged authority. Eyebrows, those small arches that frame the eyes, that carry so much of human expression, were deemed vulgar, too human, too alive. To pluck them away was to erase emotion, to leave behind a smooth, saintly expanse where nothing could betray anger, mischief, or desire. A blank brow created a holy mask, a canvas unbroken by lines of life. It was a way to say, without words, I am pure, untouched, above the mess of ordinary feeling. In Milan, the noblewoman Lady Giovanna became a quiet legend for her devotion to this ritual. Contemporary accounts describe her face as divine, serene as the Virgin herself. Painters captured her browless visage in glowing frescoes, where she gazed downward with the calm of a saint. No one recorded how often her skin reddened from the plucking, how often she pressed a cool cloth against the irritation that followed. History remembers only the effect, not the suffering behind it. The process itself was relentless. Tweezers, often crude and imprecise, pinched and pulled until the brows were gone, leaving behind tender skin. For those who could not bear the full ritual, chalk powder offered a solution, dusted across the hairs to pale and conceal them. But chalk burned when pressed into raw skin, and irritation followed no matter the method. Still, women submitted to the sting, believing that the price of beauty was nothing less than their own expressions. When the maid finally steps back, her work done, you lift your gaze toward the mirror. The face that stares back feels both familiar and foreign. Without brows, your eyes seem wider, rounder, oddly vacant. The subtle lift of amusement, the sharp line of disapproval, even the small flicker of curiosity, all are gone. What remains is a face emptied of its stories, a smooth mask fit for statues, fit for saints. It is not ugly, but it is not alive. You trace the smooth skin above your eyes, feeling the faint sting of the raw flesh beneath your fingers. There is no room for laughter in this face, no space for sorrow either. It is beauty purchased through erasure, a sacrifice of humanity for approval. You know others will look at you and see serenity, perhaps even divinity. But you, gazing at your own reflection, feel only absence. And yet even this transformation is not enough. As your gaze lingers in the mirror, your eyes drift upward. The smoothness of your brow now throws your forehead into sharper focus. It is not high enough, not grand enough, not the lofty expanse so celebrated at court. Already the thought takes root. Perhaps more must be taken, more hair plucked, shaved, or burned away to stretch the forehead toward the heavens. Your browless face, still stinging, tilts in the mirror toward its next obsession. You lean closer to the mirror, the flicker of candlelight stretching shadows across your face. Your brows are gone now, the skin still tender where each hair once grew. And yet, something else catches your eye. The expanse of your forehead seems too small, too ordinary, too human. In the silence of the chamber, a whisper curls into your thoughts. It's not high enough for court. For in this world, beauty was measured not only in pallor or fragility, but in proportion. The high forehead was the crown of nobility, a symbol of intelligence, purity, and divine favor. The inspiration came from religious art, where saints and the Virgin Mary were painted with foreheads vast and luminous, their hairlines pushed back to make them appear closer to heaven. To mirror such holy icons was to declare that your body, too, was a vessel of wisdom and virtue. History remembers women like Lady Cecilia of Provence, whose devotion to the ideal became a mark of both admiration and suffering. Accounts say she shaved her hairline again and again, pulling it higher until her forehead shone wide and bare. Court poets praised her as radiant, a living echo of the saints. Yet her attendants whispered of the angry scars that crept along her scalp, of the infections that festered when the skin broke beneath the blade. Praise and pain walked hand in hand. The methods were many, and none were gentle. Some chose to pluck, hair by hair, dragging it out at the roots until the skin burned and wept. Others shaved the hairline daily, a relentless ritual to keep the forehead smooth and high. For the desperate, harsher remedies existed. Bandages soaked in vinegar, tied tightly across the scalp to burn and weaken the follicles until the hair withered away. The smell was sharp, the sting unbearable, and yet the bandages stayed, because beauty was worth more than comfort. You imagine the scene vividly, noblewomen sitting in their chambers, scalp throbbing beneath the weight of vinegar-soaked cloths, maids scraping at their hairlines with razors or tweezers, each stroke a bargain struck between vanity and agony. To appear intelligent, one had to endure the dull ache of a raw scalp. To appear pure, one had to disfigure the very place where thought was said to reside. As you tilt your head closer to the mirror, you cannot help but touch your own hairline, fingertips brushing the delicate edge where hair meets skin. The thought of razors, of vinegar, of endless plucking makes your stomach turn. Yet you know that without it, the whispers would begin. A low forehead spoke of simple minds, of earthy desires, of a soul unfit for sainthood. To rise at court, your forehead must rise with you. Your scalp throbs even as you imagine the pain, the phantom ache of hairs being ripped away, the sting of vinegar seeping into pores. And still, the silent judgment of the mirror presses upon you. Beauty demands sacrifice. The body must yield again and again, until nothing remains untouched. From beyond the chamber you hear the faint murmur of conversation. Laughter, followed by the mention of another peculiar obsession. Teeth. Not the smile of joy, but the control of it. Teeth too large, too visible, were vulgar. only the small hidden mouth could be considered graceful. And with that thought, your mind turns uneasily toward the rituals of oral beauty. You sit quietly, a small clove pressed between your teeth, its sharp, spicy taste filling your mouth. It burns a little, numbing your tongue, but at least it hides the sourness of a body starved and weary. The maid glances at you, perhaps waiting for a smile, but you keep your lips firmly sealed. You know the rule, a smile could ruin you. For in this world, teeth were not meant to be seen. The ideal mouth was small, modest, a secret kept behind pursed lips. Large teeth, wide grins. These were marks of vulgarity, of bodies too eager to laugh, too eager to live. Nobility required restraint. To show too much was to reveal too much. The smaller the teeth, the quieter the mouth, the more virtuous the woman appeared. Writers of the age helped to etch this ideal into permanence. In one French romance, a noblewoman's beauty was praised in the strangest of terms. Her teeth were described as pearls too shy to shine. It was not their whiteness or their symmetry that made them lovely, but the fact that they remained hidden, as though modesty itself had taken root in her smile. To be beautiful was to be restrained, even in laughter. But restraint came at a cost. Teeth were not easily hidden, and so women turned to rituals that were as harsh as they were desperate. To whiten and polish, they scrubbed with ash, with ground sage, with rough powders that stripped enamel and left the gums raw. The scent of cloves or mint masked breath, but underneath lingered the taste of decay. Without modern knowledge, what passed for care often led to rot. Yet the standard demanded you persevere, no matter the damage. Better broken teeth, hidden forever, than strong teeth revealed in vulgar smiles. You shift in your chair, rolling the clove across your tongue, and the irony makes you sigh silently. Here you sit, a noble of standing, dressed in fine silks and lace, yet you fear to part your lips lest the world condemn you. A laugh caught too brightly, a smile that revealed too much. Such things could undo the image you have worked so hard to preserve. What was meant to be a gesture of joy had become instead a threat to dignity. The mirror nearby confirms your worry. You tilt your head and keep your lips sealed, noting how small your mouth appears when drawn tight. This is the look they expect, the look they demand. Quiet lips, pale and pressed, concealing teeth that are never meant to be seen. And in the silence that follows, you realize the crueler truth. When the mouth is kept small, the voice is kept small as well. The same rules that erased laughter also erased speech. Beauty here was not just about the shape of the body, it was about obedience, about silence. Your mouth stays closed, and with it, your words. The chamber around you grows quieter, the air heavier, until you feel the weight of stillness pressing into your chest. And yet, the pursuit does not end here. For if teeth and mouths were made to disappear, so too was the body itself. Lips pursed, stomach hollow, you cannot help but wonder if the ultimate beauty lay not in hiding parts of yourself, but in shrinking altogether. Thinness, fragility, was the goal that hovered ahead, waiting to consume you next. The tray is set before you, its offerings modest. A small crust of bread, a bowl of thin broth, a handful of figs. Your maid urges you softly to eat, but you turn your head away. Even this feels too indulgent. A crust of bread is too much today. Hunger gnaws at you, but hunger, you remind yourself, is a virtue. In this world, thinness was not simply a preference, it was holy. A frail body spoke of spiritual elevation, of a soul too focused on heaven to be weighed down by earthly flesh. The nobility embraced it as well, for to appear fragile was to prove you did not toil, did not labor, did not eat as common folk did. Fragility became its own currency, traded at courts and cloisters alike. The church played its part in shaping this ideal. Saints who starved themselves into emaciation were painted not as victims of deprivation, but as radiant beings, their skeletal forms glowing with divine light. Saint Clare of Assisi is often remembered this way, gaunt, weakened by years of fasting, yet celebrated in art as a figure of otherworldly beauty. Her frailty was mistaken for holiness, her suffering transformed into a symbol of grace. To look fragile was to appear closer to God, and so countless women sought to embody that image. The practices varied, though the goal remained the same: to diminish the body until only spirit seemed to remain. Some skipped meals entirely, sipping only broth so thin it carried more scent than substance. Others chewed herbs not for nourishment, but for their power to dull hunger or induce vomiting. Sage, fennel, and bitter roots were taken like medicine, not to heal, but to empty. There were those who bound their stomachs tightly with cloth, tricking their bodies into believing they needed less. Each act was a declaration of discipline, proof of superiority in both faith and status. And yet, beneath the admiration lay the tragedy. For every step closer to the ideal, the body slipped further into weakness. Muscles wasted, bones jutted sharply against the skin, eyes sank into hollow sockets. Breath came shallow, movement slowed, and the world spun in dizzy fragments. Still, those who saw such figures whispered in reverence, praising their beauty, their sanctity, their control. They saw not the suffering, but the status it conveyed. Your body weakens, but your status soars. You press your hands together in your lap, feeling the tremor in your fingers. The chamber feels colder than it did before, the candlelight dimmer, though you know it is your body, not the room, that falters. Slowly, carefully, you rise, each motion deliberate to keep your balance. The dizziness washes over you like a tide, but you steady yourself against the wall. It would not do to collapse here, not when court awaits. You reach for your gown, the fabric heavy in your hands, and begin to dress. Every movement feels like lifting stone, yet you persist, pulling layers of fabric over your fragile frame. This, too, is part of the performance, the image of nobility, pure and untouchable. As you arrange the veil across your hair, you know the next demand of beauty looms before you. Not just frailty, but purity itself, a body that is not only diminished, but sanctified by chastity. You lift the veil from its place on the table, the linen soft yet heavy in your trembling hands. As you settle it across your hair, tucking each strand away from sight, the thought presses sharply against your mind. Your hair must never tempt. The simple act of covering becomes a declaration, one that binds you as tightly as any vow. The standard was not merely cultural but sacred, born from the ever-present shadow of the Virgin Mary. Her image dominated icons, frescoes, and stained glass, her purity exalted as the unreachable model for all women. To be admired, to be praised, one had to echo that untouched aura. Virginity was not simply a state of being, but a performance of silence, stillness, and modesty. It was the cage within which beauty was required to reside. Stories reinforced the weight of this burden. Saint Lucy, remembered as a martyr of purity, became a symbol for countless young women. Her legend told of defiance against suitors, of eyes cast down in refusal, of suffering endured for the sake of chastity. And so, girls were raised to see themselves not as individuals with desires and voices, but as living icons of restraint, silent vessels of an impossible ideal. To follow Lucy's path was to be admired, but to deviate from it was to be shamed. The rules were merciless in their simplicity. Hair, considered dangerous in its beauty, was hidden beneath veils and wimples, every golden or dark strand tucked away. Eyes were lowered, for to meet another's gaze too boldly was to invite suspicion. Speech, if given at all, was whispered, measured, stripped of laughter or wit. A woman's presence was meant to suggest holiness, untouched and unworldly, even as her very existence was bound to the judgment of men. You glance at your reflection, the veil obscuring what little vitality remained in your face. The effect is undeniable. You look serene, modest, pure. And yet, beneath the linen, you feel the contradiction burning. You are meant to be beautiful, but not too beautiful. Desired, yet untouchable. Praised, but never allowed to act. The paradox coils tighter with every breath. Your value rests on a purity you must defend, but never claim as your own. The solemnity of it weighs heavy, but frustration simmers beneath the surface. How could one live as both icon and flesh? How could a woman smile, move, or even breathe freely when every gesture risked being seen as temptation? The burden of chastity was less about virtue and more about control, a system that kept women frozen between admiration and suspicion, never permitted to step fully into life. You adjust the veil once more, the fabric scratching softly against your temple, and exhale a slow, careful breath. The reflection in the mirror stares back at you, placid and obedient, though you know the cost of maintaining that illusion. And as you lower your eyes, your thoughts drift to another layer of expectation, the color of the hair hidden beneath your veil. For in this world, purity was not only measured in silence and modesty, but in the very shade of the strands that crowned your head. You tilt the small basin toward you, dipping a cloth into the pungent liquid and wringing it out until it drips. The maid warns you softly, but still you press the cloth to your scalp. At once, the sting spreads like fire along your skin. You wince, fingers clutching the edge of the chair. Your scalp burns for gold. Blonde hair was no mere fashion. It was a symbol of the divine. To carry strands like sunlight was to resemble the angels painted in illuminated manuscripts, their golden halos flowing into locks that gleamed with purity. Religious art taught that blonde was not just beautiful, it was holy. And so, for those whose hair was too dark, too ordinary, the pursuit of radiance became a ritual of suffering. Courts across Europe whispered of women who used their golden hair as power, as well as ornament. Caterina Sforza, fierce and formidable, was famed for her shimmering locks. In a world where alliances rose and fell on appearances, her hair was a diplomatic asset, gleaming in courts like a promise of divine favor. For others, the glow of blonde was not only a personal triumph, but a weapon, wielded in politics and desire alike. But the process of achieving such light was brutal. Lye was one of the most common tools, its caustic strength eating through pigment as readily as it burned through flesh. Women sat in gardens with their hair spread out beneath the sun, rinses of lye or vinegar dripping into their scalps, the pain masked by parasols and polite conversation. For those who could not bear the harshness, saffron was steeped into concoctions, staining strands with a yellow-gold hue. The expense of such spice made it a mark of wealth as well as beauty, though the smell was sharp and lingered long after. You can almost imagine it now, the noblewomen reclining with bowls of solution balanced nearby, servants combing the liquid through their hair strand by strand, the sunlight turning their suffering into spectacle. Some emerged with glowing crowns of gold, others with brittle clumps that snapped and fell, their pursuit ending in baldness. Still, the ideal pressed on, demanding sacrifice in exchange for sanctity. As the sting on your scalp deepens, you inhale and catch the acrid scent rising with the steam. The hair beneath your veil gleams faintly, lighter than before, kissed not by heaven but by poison. You imagine the praise, how radiant, how angelic, they will say. Yet you know what lingers beneath, the burns, the weakness, the silent fear that the next rinse may leave you shorn entirely. Your hair shines, but it smells like regret. The glow is divine only from a distance. Up close, it reeks of chemicals and pain. This is the bargain beauty demands, to seem touched by heaven while feeling consumed by fire. You lower the basin, scalp throbbing, and adjust the cloth over your head. The lightness is there, shimmering faintly, but so too is the reminder that appearances rarely match reality. And as the scent clings stubbornly to your hair, you realize another trial awaits, how to mask the odors of body and ritual when bathing itself is a rare indulgence. You slip a sprig of lavender into the folds of your gown, pressing it close against the fabric where the warmth of your body will coax its fragrance to rise. The air around you softens, touched with a sweetness that almost convinces you of freshness. It masks the day's toil, you tell yourself, though beneath the linen your skin remembers every hour of weariness. Perfume was no mere indulgence. It was a necessity in a world where bathing was rare and water itself was suspect. The scents of the body, inevitable and persistent, were considered shameful, something to be smothered beneath layers of roses and cloves. Rose water was poured into basins, sprinkled over hair, and dabbed upon wrists. Clove oil was rubbed into gloves, the warmth of hands releasing the spice with every gesture. A noble did not simply arrive at court, they announced themselves with a trail of fragrance, as though the air itself should testify to their refinement. Stories linger of women who became legends not for their words or their deeds, but for their scent. Isabella of Brittany was said to carry a floral aura so strong and enchanting that her presence was remembered long after she left a room. Courtiers whispered that her very gowns breathed perfume, that even her letters arrived perfumed, the parchment carrying roses across borders. To smell like her was to embody grace itself, though few could afford the constant work of maintaining such an aura. The methods were as inventive as they were desperate. Small sachets of dried herbs, lavender, rosemary, mint, were stitched into gowns, releasing their scent as bodies shifted beneath heavy fabrics. Gloves were steeped in aromatic oils, so that a simple wave of the hand would leave behind a lingering trace of clove or orange peel. Hair, too, became a vessel for fragrance, soaked in oils that glistened under candlelight. Yet beneath the oils, the herbs, the powders, the skin itself remained untouched by water, its needs forgotten in favor of masks. For a moment, you close your eyes, inhaling deeply. The lavender and clove mingle in the air, rich and soothing, almost enough to make you forget the truth. But your body remembers. Beneath the perfumes, your skin longs for cleansing, longs for water, longs for relief from the endless disguises. The illusion is sweet but fragile. You smell divine, but your skin begs for water. And still you remind yourself, this is beauty. This is what the court expects. Not reality, but the performance of grace, a body draped in scent and silence. You smooth your gown, breathing the floral air around you, and prepare yourself for the next step. If perfume is the veil that conceals the body, makeup is the mask that remakes the face. Your hand drifts toward the small jar on the table, its chalky contents waiting in shadow. The paste within promises radiance, though you know too well it carries danger. Lavender may have softened your scent, but what waits in that jar will strip your very skin in pursuit of beauty. With one last breath of sweetness, you reach for the toxic mask that must follow. You open the small jar resting on the table, its contents pale and chalky, the faintest scent of vinegar clinging to it. Dipping 2 fingers into the mixture, you spread it carefully across your cheeks and forehead. The paste feels cool at first, but heavy, pulling at your skin as though weighing you down. In the mirror's dim reflection, the transformation begins. Your face becomes a canvas of lies. This was the art of beauty in its most dangerous form. To achieve the pallor so prized in courts and sanctuaries, women turned to creams laced with lead or arsenic. Each promised a ghostly whiteness, a surface untouched by sun or labor, a mask of virtue painted directly onto the skin. A healthy glow was considered vulgar. What mattered was the illusion of frailty, and the powders delivered it with merciless efficiency. Lady Eleanor of Norfolk was one such devotee, remembered not for her laughter or her wisdom, but for the ivory pallor that made her the envy of many. Yet behind the admiration lay a secret few dared to voice. Her attendants whispered of the way her skin cracked and peeled, raw from daily applications of the very paste that brought her such renown. To maintain the mask, she sacrificed the face beneath it, layer by layer. The dangers were countless, though often ignored. Lead sank deep into the pores, poisoning the body slowly, invisibly. Arsenic carried its own toll, leaching vitality until tremors shook the hands, and strange weakness settled in the bones. Blisters rose beneath the smooth surface, infections brewed, and organs quietly faltered under the weight of constant exposure. Yet the mirror showed only radiance, and the court praised what they saw. The suffering beneath remained hidden, a private price paid for public admiration. You lean closer now, studying your reflection in the uneven glass. The paste has smoothed away the flush of life, replacing it with the brittle whiteness they demand. For a moment, you understand the allure. It is not your face that looks back, but something more spectral, more refined, more acceptable. The irony stings sharper than the paste itself. You smear poison to look pure, painting sickness upon your skin to appear untouched. But the cycle is cruel. Each layer conceals the damage done by the last. The sores, the redness, the peeling flesh, all are hidden beneath new coats of the same poison that caused them. And so the mask becomes both problem and solution, a ritual with no escape. You hide the damage with more poison, and each day the lie grows heavier, until even your own reflection becomes a stranger. The candlelight trembles as you turn your head, the pale surface of your face catching the glow like porcelain. To the outside world, you will appear virtuous, refined, even holy. But you know the truth, that beneath the mask lies a body unraveling. And yet, beauty here is not measured by health but by illusion, no matter how destructive. You smooth the final layer, your skin prickling beneath the weight, and sit back. The reflection staring at you is no longer vibrant, no longer alive, but it is exactly what society demands. Fragile, spectral, almost sickly. And so, with your face painted into frailty, you prepare to embody the next great ideal, the aesthetic of illness itself. The hall is warm with firelight, the air thick with the scent of roasted meats and spiced wine. Musicians play softly in the corner, their melodies weaving through the chatter of nobles gathered at long tables. You sit among them, your gown heavy, your painted face pale beneath the glow of candles. A cup of wine is pressed into your hand, but your fingers tremble. The room begins to tilt, your vision swimming. With a careful sigh, you let yourself slip sideways, fainting gracefully to the floor. Gasps echo through the hall, but instead of alarm, admiration follows. Your weakness wins praise. In this world, frailty was not feared, it was celebrated. To be fragile was to be elevated, closer to the divine, as though hovering between life and death made one more holy. The ideal woman was not vigorous or strong, but delicate, translucent, breakable. Every swoon, every stagger, every flutter of faint breath was taken as a sign of refinement. A body barely able to support itself was considered the height of beauty. Burgundy's courts once whispered endlessly about Lady Marie, whose swoons became a kind of legend. At banquets, she would collapse in her seat, her eyes rolling back as attendants rushed to her side. Far from being mocked or pitied, she was revered, her frailty a performance of grace. Poets compared her to lilies bending in the breeze, fragile yet exquisite, her weakness treated as art. It was not survival that was admired, but the artful performance of decline. And there were methods, of course, to cultivate this aesthetic. Fasting hollowed the body, ensuring the ribs pressed faintly against gowns and the cheeks sank into delicate shadows. For the eyes, berry-tinted powders were smudged along the lids to mimic exhaustion. The purplish hues of sleeplessness turned into decoration. Cold compresses were laid across the skin, not to soothe but to swell, creating puffiness that suggested illness. Even trembling hands and unsteady steps were rehearsed, refined into gestures of beauty. You think of it now as you lie faint upon the banquet floor. Attendants dab your forehead with cloths, courtiers murmur in hushed admiration. They do not see a body crying out for nourishment or relief. They see only sanctity, fragility perfected. You have become a symbol, a performance of suffering mistaken for grace, and yet the cost gnaws at you, quiet but constant. Beneath the admiration is a body unraveling. Muscles weaken, vision blurs, the skin grows thin as parchment. You are beautiful, yes, but barely alive. To be adored here is to stand perpetually on the edge of collapse, to make a spectacle of your own undoing. The music swells again as the banquet continues, laughter and applause filling the hall as if nothing has happened. You rise slowly, steadied by hands that seem almost eager to touch you, as though your fragility might rub off on them. The mask holds, the performance continues. But as you steady yourself, your gaze drifts across the hall. There, among the crowd, a knight stands adjusting his cloak, his polished armor gleaming beneath the torchlight. His posture is deliberate, his face carefully composed. You notice then that men, too, are bound by their own standards of beauty, performing strength and refinement in ways no less demanding than your own. You watch from your seat as the knight across the hall runs a gloved hand across his armor, polishing it with more care than he gives his supper. The firelight flickers against the steel, but what catches your attention is not the gleam of his chestplate, it is the glow of his skin, faintly oiled, faintly perfumed. His armor shines, but so does his skin. For if women were bound to look fragile and holy, men too were trapped in their own ideals of beauty. The court expected its knights and princes not only to be strong, but to appear perfectly composed, their bodies as much a spectacle as their deeds. Lean frames were favored, tall and angular, with sharp features that suggested both intellect and severity. A man's hands told their own story, calloused enough to prove his martial worth, yet delicate enough to hold a goblet gracefully at a banquet. Balance was everything, rugged, but never coarse, refined, but never effeminate. Prince Henry of Navarre was praised often for this very balance. Chroniclers wrote of his lean body, his piercing gaze, and the way he carried both sword and lute with equal elegance. His beauty was knightly, but it was also theatrical, performed for courts that scrutinized every detail. He was no less bound than the women around him, expected to live not as a man, but as an ideal. And so, methods arose to keep men in line with these expectations. Eyebrows were shaped with tweezers, plucked into neat arcs that conveyed severity without wildness. Vinegar tonics were dabbed onto skin to keep it clear and bright, though the sting was sharp and often left redness in its wake. Jose, bright, tight, and unforgiving, were worn to display lean legs, the tautness leaving little room for imperfection. Even hair was fussed over, cut and styled to frame the face in deliberate fashion, whether flowing like a troubadour or cropped to suggest martial focus. You glance again at the knight across the room as he lifts his goblet, his hand poised with elegance. His armor suggests war, but his gestures suggest courtly theater. The contradiction is almost comical, and yet you cannot help but sympathize. Men, too, performed for the court's gaze, bending themselves to expectations that praised them only when they were both more and less than human. The satire lies in the symmetry. Women painted their faces with poison to look fragile, while men polished their skin and squeezed into hose to look formidable. Both roles were costumes, enforced by the whispers of the court and the immortalized images of art. Beneath the steel and silk, both suffered the same truth. Beauty was never natural, but demanded, rehearsed, and displayed. The banquet hums around you, the air heavy with perfume, roasted meats, and the rustle of silks. Yet even as admiration flows freely, you cannot ignore the strain in every posture, the quiet desperation in every polished surface. And as your eyes wander across the room, you notice not only faces and gestures, but the fabric that binds them. The gowns, the hose, the tight collars and heavy layers. Beauty was never just painted on the skin, but sewn into the very clothes that restricted the body beneath. You stand still as two maids circle you, tugging at the cords of your bodice with practiced hands. The fabric creaks, the laces groan, and your ribs cry out beneath the relentless pressure. You exhale, hoping to find relief, but the pause only gives them room to pull tighter. Your ribs protest, but beauty demands. The bodice was not simply clothing. It was a cage disguised as fashion. Its purpose was to sculpt the body into a silhouette admired by both court and church. Narrow, upright, saintly. The ideal was a torso that appeared elongated, the chest flattened into modesty, the waist cinched into fragile elegance. No natural body could achieve this shape unaided, and so stiff fabrics, whalebone slats, and even metal supports became tools of daily transformation. In Milan, the Duchess's gowns were so elaborate, so demanding, that she required 3 maids just to be laced into them. Contemporary accounts marvel at her endurance, though one wonders whether admiration should have been reserved for her patience rather than her beauty. Each layer pressed her body into compliance, the gown itself becoming less garment and more contraption, a public spectacle of control. The process was exacting. Fabric stiffened with starch was cut and stitched into panels that wrapped tightly around the torso. Whalebone stays were slid into narrow channels, rigid strips pressing against flesh to hold the body in its new, impossible form. For the wealthy, even metal was used, cool and unyielding against the skin. Once laced, movement was restricted to small, careful gestures. Sitting became a ceremony. Bending was nearly impossible. Breathing was a privilege, not a guarantee. You feel it now as the laces tighten one final time. Your back is rigid, your chest unable to expand more than a fraction. Every breath is shallow, sharp, leaving you faint and lightheaded. And yet, when you glance at the mirror, you cannot deny the effect. The silhouette is striking. Your waist looks impossibly narrow, your posture dignified, your frame saint-like. You glide, but breathing is a luxury. There is a grim humor in it, the absurdity of beauty that demanded suffocation. At banquets, women sat still, sipping cautiously, pretending not to feel the ache in their ribs or the fire in their lungs. Every gesture was deliberate, as though fragility itself were an art form. To stumble or collapse was no failure, but rather another sign of refinement, another performance of delicate control. And yet, as much as the bodice restricted, it also revealed something unspoken: endurance. Beneath the silks and jewels, beneath the whalebone and metal, there was a body enduring constant pain, reshaped daily in the name of an ideal. It was beauty born of sacrifice, beauty measured not in ease but in suffering. The maids step back, satisfied with their work, and you force a graceful turn, though your lungs beg for air. Your lips part slightly, a shallow breath slipping past them, and in that moment, you realize the next stage of your transformation awaits. Not your ribs, not your waist, but your mouth itself, for beauty's final command will be written upon your lips. You raise a small pot to your mouth, dipping a fingertip into the faintest smear of balm. It glistens softly, catching the light, but when spread across your lips, it vanishes into nothing more than a sheen, a ghost of moisture. Your lips must whisper, not shout. The rule is simple, and yet its weight is immense. In the medieval courts, lips were not simply features. They were symbols, signposts pointing toward a woman's virtue or her shame. Small, pale lips spoke of modesty, humility, and restraint. They suggested a soul too pious, too gentle to invite desire. A woman with such lips was considered safe, untouchable, and pure. But lips tinted too deeply, too vividly, carried the scent of sin. Red lips suggested passion, appetite, and danger. They belonged not to saints or noblewomen, but to courtesans, temptresses, or worse, women accused of witchcraft. Consider the example of Lady Beatrice of Venice, renowned for her quiet beauty. She was said to carry with her at all times a tiny vial of rose balm, used sparingly, so lightly applied it was nearly invisible. Chronicles describe her as a woman whose mouth resembled a bud in winter, closed and pale, too shy to blossom. It was meant as the highest praise. In truth, it was a reminder that even the softest part of the body was expected to be subdued, folded inward, hidden from sight. The methods for achieving this were deceptively simple, yet always edged with care. Women used crushed berries, diluted until their stain was barely perceptible, brushed against lips for the faintest blush of life. Wax glosses, mixed with herbs or oils, added a discreet sheen, not enough to glimmer, only enough to prevent the mouth from appearing dry or neglected. Some chewed petals of violets or cloves before courtly gatherings, leaving behind a subtle hue and scent that might pass as natural. But these rituals were also traps, for the line between modesty and scandal was perilously thin. One shade too deep, one gesture too bold, and whispers would gather like smoke around your name. A lady seen with lips too red risked rumors of secret affairs or unholy practices. The balm that made you delicate one evening might damn you the next. You look now at your reflection, pressing your lips together so the balm smooths evenly. They are pale, neat, and quiet. The mirror shows no trace of scandal, no stain of desire. Yet you cannot escape the thought that even silence carries risk. To close your mouth too firmly is to appear stern. To let it part too easily is to invite speculation. Each breath, each curve of the lips becomes a silent language others are eager to translate, eager to condemn. The tension sits with you as you turn from the mirror. Your lips are perfect, the performance rehearsed to the smallest detail. But as you walk toward the great hall, another truth presses itself forward. Beauty is not only about appearance, it is about what that appearance says of your wealth, your virtue, your worth. And soon you will find yourself measured by those deeper, harsher scales. A courtier approaches you with a smile that is both polite and calculating. His words fall like honey, but carry the weight of judgment. Your face speaks of divine favor. At first, it sounds like praise, a compliment wrapped in reverence. Yet beneath it lingers something sharper, a reminder that your beauty is not really yours. It is not about you at all. It is a reflection of what others believe you represent. Your family's wealth, your bloodline's purity, your supposed closeness to God. In the medieval imagination, beauty was never just surface deep. It was woven into a grand equation where wealth and virtue were its constant companions. A flawless face did not merely please the eye. It testified to moral goodness, to divine blessing, to the prosperity of your house. Symmetry in features meant symmetry in soul. Clear skin suggested a clean conscience. To look beautiful was to be read as wealthy, virtuous, and worthy of trust. Consider the case of Eleanor of Castile, whose portraits show her features arranged with remarkable harmony. Chroniclers of the time pointed to that symmetry as proof of her virtue and wisdom, claiming her outward perfection mirrored an inward purity. Whether or not Eleanor herself believed this, the image served its purpose, a political tool, a moral sermon painted into flesh. Her beauty was evidence, used to secure alliances and inspire loyalty. But the implications of this belief cut both ways. If beauty equaled wealth and virtue, then flaws, real or imagined, were signs of poverty, sin, or corruption. A scar might be read as punishment from God. Crooked teeth could hint at dishonesty. A crooked nose suggested moral weakness. Even a complexion too ruddy, too sun-kissed, might whisper of field labor and the stain of low birth. To fall short of the standard was to risk more than mockery. It was to invite suspicion, exclusion, and disgrace. And so beauty became a trap, a cage lined with mirrors. You learn to see yourself not as you are, but as you are interpreted. A wrinkle is not simply time's signature. It is a sign of fading worth. A blemish is not a fleeting mark, but a blot on your family's reputation. You cover, you conceal, you sculpt, because your face has become your currency. It can buy you admiration, opportunity, even security. But its value is always in question, always ready to drop without warning. You glance around the hall and see the same truth etched into every face. The young maidens, polished and pale, draw approving nods. The older women, their beauty dimmed, linger at the edges of the room, their voices quieter, their presence tolerated but no longer celebrated. Each person is weighed not by their words or deeds, but by the smoothness of their skin, the clarity of their eyes, the balance of their features. Your heart sinks under the weight of it. You understand now that your worth is never stable. It shifts with each gaze, each whispered judgment, each comparison to saints or queens whose portraits set impossible standards. And as you straighten your gown, you sense another rule pressing in, a set of laws meant to bind beauty and wealth even tighter, ensuring that no one dares step beyond their assigned place. Soon, you will learn that even the colors you wear are dictated by power. You pause in front of a mirror, fingers brushing the clasp of your belt. The embroidery glimmers faintly in the candlelight, and a question creeps into your mind. Is this belt too fine for my rank? It is a ridiculous thought, and yet it is one you cannot ignore. For beauty in your world is not simply a matter of taste or effort, It is dictated by law. These were the sumptuary laws, a web of rules spun tightly around fabric, jewels, and color. They declared that only nobles of the highest standing could drape themselves in certain shades, imperial purple, for instance, or the richest scarlet, colors reserved for royalty and their close kin. Silks, velvets, and furs were rationed by rank, each yard of fabric signaling not just wealth, but the position you held in the rigid hierarchy. Even the cut of a sleeve or the width of a shoe might betray an ambition too bold, a beauty too lavish for your place. The reasoning, at least on the surface, was simple: to preserve order, to keep each person easily identifiable by their appearance. A peasant should look like a peasant, a merchant's wife like a merchant's wife, and a duchess unmistakably like a duchess. To blur these lines was to threaten the very fabric of society. But beneath that reasoning lay fear, the fear that someone might climb too high by dressing too well, that beauty could mask ambition and allow an outsider to slip through the gates of power. Take Venice, for example, where city officials fined a merchant's wife for daring to wear sleeves of imported silk. The record does not tell us how she felt about this humiliation, but one can imagine her defiance. Perhaps she wished to present herself as worthy of her husband's rising fortune. Perhaps she simply liked the way the silk shimmered when she moved. But the law saw only arrogance, a woman stepping above her station, and punished her for the crime of beauty. Enforcement was no idle threat. Clerks and officials patrolled the streets and markets, their eyes sharp for violators. A gleam of forbidden velvet, a fur trim too lush, a jewel too large, all were grounds for penalties. These men carried not swords but quills, ready to record names and tally fines. A noble woman might be spared with a warning, but a merchant's daughter could be made an example, her vanity punished for all to see. And here lies the paradox. You were expected to be beautiful, but only within the narrow confines of law. To appear plain was to risk whispers of neglect, but to shine too brightly was to invite suspicion or scorn. Beauty was demanded, yet strictly rationed. A performance you had to give, but one where every gesture, every hemline, every shimmer was watched. You glance again at your belt, its modest embroidery suddenly suspect. Should you hide it, remove it, or risk the possibility that someone might see you as more than your station allows? The tension coils within you, and you realize that beauty is no longer just about pleasing the eye. It is about survival, and survival is never simple, for in this world, failing to meet the right standard could mark you as not only improper, but ugly, and ugliness carried a far darker shadow. You pass through the echoing stone hall, the murmur of voices carrying like wind through cracks. At first it seems like idle chatter, until one phrase pierces the air. Her scars mark her as cursed. The words drop heavily, followed by nervous laughter and whispers quick to scatter. You feel your stomach tighten. It is not simply beauty that is judged here. It is the lack of it. For in this world, ugliness is not merely unfortunate. It is dangerous. To be deemed unattractive in the medieval mind was to risk being associated with sin, with corruption, even with witchcraft. A blemished face, a twisted feature, a scar too visible, all could be read as signs of inner rot, evidence that God had turned his face away from you. The logic was cruel but consistent. If beauty was proof of virtue and divine favor, then ugliness must be proof of evil, of curses, of dealings with the devil himself. Consider Anna of Cologne, a woman remembered in records not for her deeds, but for her face. Her nose, crooked since birth, was taken as evidence of witchcraft. Neighbors muttered that she curdled milk, that she spoiled crops with a glance, that her twisted features betrayed a twisted soul. The whispers grew, and soon accusations followed. She was dragged before authorities, her appearance treated as evidence enough. Her fate was sealed not by crime, but by the contour of her nose. The consequences for such judgments were brutal. To be ugly was to risk shunning, your presence avoided in marketplaces, your name spoken only in hushed tones. Exile might follow, as villages turned their backs on those whose faces made them uneasy. And in the darkest cases, ugliness could mean death. Women accused of witchcraft, often poor, often old, often marked by scars or deformities, were burned, drowned, or hanged, their bodies destroyed, because their faces did not fit the fragile ideal of virtue. You imagine it now, the terror of waking each morning and wondering if a wrinkle, a blemish, a crooked smile might one day condemn you. How each glance from a neighbor could turn sharp, how each whisper could grow into a storm. Beauty was a shield, fragile, but essential. Without it, you were exposed, vulnerable to suspicion that could grow into persecution. Your reflection in the polished silver plate is suddenly uneasy to meet. You search for flaws, for marks that might betray you. The skin beneath your eyes seems shadowed, your lips too pale, too thin. What stories might others tell of you if they chose to? You understand now why so many clung desperately to paints, to perfumes, to the rituals of beauty. They were not always chasing admiration. Sometimes they were running from fear. A chill runs through you as the murmur of gossip fades. You lift your hands to your head, fingers brushing against the edge of your wimple. You tug it tighter, adjusting the linen until it hugs your jaw and frames your face. It feels less like an ornament and more like armor, a shield of modesty to hide behind. And yet even as it covers you, you know it cannot silence the whispers entirely. The maid's hands move with practiced precision, folding and pinning the linen around your head. The fabric tightens beneath your chin, pulling snug against your jaw until it feels less like clothing and more like a restraint. It hugs your jaw like a vow, she murmurs, stepping back to admire her handiwork. You catch your reflection and see not yourself, but a silhouette reshaped, softened, erased. The wimple has swallowed your hair, your neck, your individuality, leaving only a narrow window of face for the world to judge. The wimple was never meant to be optional. It was a statement, a public declaration of modesty and piety, a sign that a woman belonged to order and not to temptation. Loose hair was dangerous, too sensual, too alive, but hair bound and hidden beneath folds of linen signaled virtue, chastity, submission. In churches, at courts, and in city streets, the wimple was as common as the sound of bells. To appear without it was to risk whispers, or worse, accusations of pride or vanity. And yet, this simple garment became a canvas for extravagance. Look at Queen Matilda of England, whose wimples rose into elaborate constructions that framed her face like the arches of a cathedral. They were feats of architecture in their own right, layers of linen starched and folded into precise geometry. What was meant as modesty often became display, a paradox that lingered in every pleat. The variations spoke loudly of status. For daily wear, a plain linen wimple sufficed, simple and sturdy, though it often chafed the skin and smelled faintly of starch. At feasts or holy days, however, the fabric shifted. Silk imported from distant lands, lace edged with gold thread, veils layered so sheer they seemed to glow in candlelight. What began as a cage of modesty became, in the right company, another performance of wealth and beauty, bound by the very laws it was meant to uphold. But not all women accepted the wimple's grip without resistance. Some loosened the fabric, allowing a glimpse of hair to escape at the temples, a whisper of defiance peeking through folds of linen. Others pulled the garment just a little lower at the chin, softening its severity. These gestures were small, subtle rebellions, but they carried meaning. They said, "I am not only what you want me to be. I am still here, behind the fabric." For every wimple that sat perfectly in place, there were countless others worn with a quiet shrug, signaling a resistance too faint for officials to punish, but strong enough to be felt. You run your fingers along the edge of the fabric, the starch scratching faintly at your skin. It hides you, yes, but it also binds you. A piece of cloth has become both prison and shield. You wonder how it is that modesty has been woven into fabric, stitched into law, folded into a symbol of control. And yet, as you look at your reflection, veiled and silent, you cannot help but think of the image that hovers over every woman's life in this world. The serene figure of the Virgin Mary. Her blue robes, her veiled head, her eyes lowered in humility. It is her shadow you are asked to emulate, her perfection you are expected to mirror. And as the fabric presses against your skin, you feel the weight of that expectation settle upon you. You lift the gown from its chest, its folds dyed in a deep calm blue, the shade most sacred, most imitated. As the fabric drapes across your shoulders, you feel the weight of more than cloth. You mimic a saint's serenity. You whisper inwardly, watching the way the color transforms you. In this moment, you are no longer yourself, but a shadow of the Virgin Mary, the unreachable model set before every woman in your world. The Virgin was more than a figure of worship. She was a standard, a mold into which all women were expected to fit. She was purity incarnate, untouched, untainted, silent in her devotion. To dress in Marian blue, to veil your hair, to lower your eyes, these were not just gestures of faith, but of conformity. You were not meant to show passion or hunger or anger. You were to become a symbol of virtue, a quiet presence that inspired reverence but demanded nothing in return. Chronicles tell us of Queen Joanna of Navarre, praised not for her wit or strategy, but for embodying Marian grace. Her gowns were cut modestly, her hair veiled in public, her expression serene even in moments of political turmoil. To her contemporaries, she became the image of holy womanhood, her life a canvas painted with restraint. Whether Joanna herself felt this as honor or as prison, we cannot know. But the record makes clear, she was admired not for who she was, but for how closely she resembled an icon. The expectations were exacting. High necklines concealed not only the body, but the possibility of desire. Veiled hair erased individuality, folding every woman into the same silhouette. Expressions were to remain calm, saintly, untouched by the mess of human feeling. Joy too bright, grief too raw, anger too sharp. All of these betrayed the ideal. Even your voice was meant to be measured, low, respectful, as though any hint of laughter or boldness would shatter the illusion of sanctity. And here lies the cruel paradox. You are human, with thoughts that stir and emotions that burn. Yet you are asked to be divine, to carry the serenity of a saint while moving through a world that constantly tests your patience, your strength, your heart. To embody the Virgin Mary is to be forever in conflict with yourself, always suppressing, always molding, always pretending that the quiet mask is the truth of your soul. You smooth the folds of your gown, the Marian blue shimmering in the dim light. In the mirror, you look serene, almost ethereal, as though the transformation is complete. Yet under the fabric, your heart beats fast, your mind restless. You know you are more than this borrowed holiness. And as you lift your gaze from the reflection, a figure catches your eye. Across the hall, a noble woman moves with deliberate poise, her smile alive, her gestures bold. She does not lower her eyes but meets every glance with confidence. Her presence does not echo the Virgin's serenity. It burns with something else entirely. Power, allure, defiance. And you realize that beauty can take another shape, one that tempts fate and bends rules, one that does not bow but commands. She enters the hall like a spark striking dry wood, and the air changes around her. Heads turn, conversations falter, and eyes are drawn as though pulled by an unseen cord. You watch her glide forward, her gown a deliberate blaze of color against the sea of muted tones. She smiles, not shyly, not modestly, but with full intention. Her smile commands the room. This is no Marian saint, no veiled shadow of piety. This is a woman who understands beauty not as a burden, but as a weapon, honed and wielded with precision. Courtesans and noble seductresses carved a place for themselves in a society that otherwise sought to silence them. Where purity demanded restraint, they offered allure. Where silence was expected, they spoke with wit that dazzled and disarmed. In courts and cities alike, their beauty was not for obedience, but for influence. Consider Laura of Venice, whose name rippled through merchant houses and senate halls. Chroniclers tell us she could sway a negotiation with nothing more than her gaze, her presence unsettling powerful men who prided themselves on reason. She wore bold gowns of crimson and gold, colors that declared wealth and provocation. Her laughter was sharp, her words laced with double meanings, her gestures carefully measured to suggest closeness while denying it. For Laura, beauty was not simply appearance. It was strategy, politics, survival. The methods of such women were deliberate. Their gowns revealed more than modest fashion allowed, but never enough to condemn outright. Their speech sparkled with cleverness, ensuring they were remembered not only for their faces, but for their presence of mind. Even their glances were calculated, lingering just long enough to ignite imagination, withdrawing just in time to leave men chasing shadows. These performances were dangerous, but they granted women a form of agency denied to most of their sex. And yet, the cost was steep. Beauty was both crown and chain, granting power only so long as it bloomed. When youth faded, when lines traced across the face or vitality dimmed, influence dissolved. Those who had once commanded rooms found themselves dismissed, their names carried only in gossip or forgotten altogether. The seductress's reign was brilliant, but brief. Her power built on foundations that time was always eager to erode. You study the woman across the hall. Her confidence is intoxicating, her defiance admirable. She lives by different rules, refusing to bow to the same scripts that bind you. But as she turns, her smile lingering on an older man whose wealth is legend, you cannot help but feel a shadow of unease. For every glance, every smile, every calculated word is part of a bargain struck with beauty itself, a bargain destined to expire. You press your hand against your chest, feeling your own heartbeat quicken, torn between envy and caution. There is power in her flame, yes, but also danger in its fleetingness. And as your eyes linger, you cannot escape another thought. What happens when the fire dims, when beauty bends beneath the weight of years? That fear waits quietly in the corners of every mirror, and soon it will come for you too. You lean closer to the mirror, candlelight flickering across the silvered glass, and there it is, a line, faint but undeniable, etching itself across the corner of your eye. It is small, almost invisible to others, but to you, it feels like a betrayal. Time betrays you in the mirror. You touch it with your fingertip as though pressure alone might smooth it away. But the truth lingers. The first crack has formed. In your world, youth was not just admired, it was demanded. Beauty meant opportunity, attention, and status, but only when carried on a young face. For women, aging did not signal wisdom or respect. It marked decline, a slow fading into invisibility. Wrinkles, gray hairs, or sagging skin were not natural signs of life well lived, but warnings that your worth was slipping away. Where once people sought your company, they now averted their gaze, as though time's signature made you less palatable to look at. You recall the story of widow Maria, whose life after her husband's death became a quiet exile. She had once been respected, her beauty drawing admiration across the city. But as her hair silvered and her skin loosened, neighbors whispered. No longer seen as a woman of charm, she was described instead as pitiable, her presence reduced to a cautionary tale of what time would do to all women. Respect did not shield her, even piety could not redeem her. She became invisible, though she walked the same streets as before. Desperation gave rise to remedies, each more uncomfortable than the last. Harsh scrubs of salt and crushed shells were rubbed into skin to scrape away years, leaving the face raw and burning. Animal fat was smeared across wrinkles to soften them, though it clogged pores and left behind a rancid scent. Some dabbed vinegar on gray strands, hoping its sting might bleach youth back into their hair. These rituals rarely worked, yet they carried the faint hope of delay, of buying another year before whispers grew louder. The cruelty of it all gnaws at you. Youth was your currency, now spent. Every smile that once brought approval, every glance that once earned admiration, all of it has been devalued by the silent march of time. You wonder if you were ever truly loved for yourself, or only for the smoothness of your skin and the brightness of your eyes. Was your beauty yours at all, or merely rented until time came to collect its debt? Yet within the melancholy, a spark of defiance flickers. Perhaps there is strength in surviving what beauty cannot. Perhaps there is a different kind of power in being overlooked, in stepping out of the cruel light of constant scrutiny. A wrinkle may condemn you in the eyes of others, but it also tells the story of a life endured, a truth no powder can erase. You draw the wimple tighter around your head and turn from the mirror. The melancholy lingers, but so does the thought that maybe there is another model of beauty, one not tied to youth or seduction. Your mind drifts toward the holy figures you've seen in shrines, their bodies frail yet revered, their faces thin yet glowing with devotion. If society rejects your aging flesh, perhaps sanctity offers another kind of beauty. The chapel is hushed, the air heavy with incense and candle smoke. You step closer to the reliquary, its glass gleaming faintly in the dim light. Inside lies the body of a saint, her bones draped in silk and gold thread, her face painted with a serene expression, as though death itself had become a mask of grace. You lean forward, breath held. Her bones glow under glass. The sight is both mesmerizing and unsettling, a reminder that even in death, beauty is demanded, sanctified, and displayed. For centuries, the emaciated bodies of saints were treated not with horror, but with reverence. Where ordinary frailty drew pity or scorn, the frailty of holy women was declared divine. Thinness was not a symptom of illness, it was proof of spiritual triumph. A hollowed face, a body shrunk nearly to nothing, became evidence of closeness to God. The more the flesh diminished, the more the spirit was believed to shine. Think of Saint Rose of Viterbo, remembered not for a robust life, but for her delicate weakness. Her fasting left her skeletal, her youth consumed by devotion. Yet the church praised her frailty as miraculous, proof that her body needed no earthly sustenance when she was nourished by heaven itself. In art and in story, her fragility was celebrated as beauty, her very absence of flesh painted as radiance. Such sanctity did not come gently. The practices were brutal, cloaked in devotion. Women starved themselves deliberately, refusing bread and water for days, weeks, sometimes longer, until their bodies trembled on the edge of collapse. Others embraced self-mortification, beating their own flesh, sleeping on cold stone, wearing hair shirts that scraped their skin raw. Pain was recast as purity, suffering became a ladder to heaven, and as their bodies wasted away, those around them whispered admiration. It is easy to be awed by the devotion, by the idea of a mortal being transcending earthly needs. Yet sorrow lingers beneath the awe, a sorrow sharpened by the realization of what was lost. These women, praised as holy, were often children, adolescents, or young women whose lives were consumed before they had a chance to live them. Her beauty was her erasure. What the world called sanctity was often starvation. What it called purity was pain endured in silence. You look again at the saint's remains, dressed in finery she never wore in life, made into a spectacle for centuries of eyes. Does she rest, or is she still performing, her body bound to expectations that did not end with death? The thought chills you, even as the glow of candles casts her in divine light. Stepping back, your gaze lifts from the relic to the paintings on the chapel walls. There, saints and noble women alike are rendered flawless, their faces serene, their forms elongated and perfected beyond reality. If flesh and bone could not meet the ideal, then art would finish the work, shaping visions of beauty that no living woman could ever match. You lean over a manuscript illuminated with gold leaf, its pages glowing like sunlight caught on water. A lady stares back at you from the painted margin, her eyes calm, her skin flawless, her features arranged with such symmetry it feels uncanny. Her face is too perfect to be real, and of course it isn't. It is a fiction, a curated vision shaped not by truth but by brush and pigment. Art in the medieval world was not a mirror, it was a mold. Painters and weavers did not capture women as they were, but as they were expected to be. A tapestry or fresco was less a portrait and more a sermon, teaching all who gazed upon it what beauty should look like, what virtue should feel like. The women within these frames were always noble, always serene, always radiant in ways that flesh could never match. Take the famous unicorn tapestries, where a young noblewoman reclines in a garden, her skin pale as ivory, her body slender, her demeanor calm and untouchable. She is surrounded by symbols, unicorns for purity, lilies for chastity, and rich brocade patterns that whisper of wealth. In truth, no woman ever looked this way in life. The lady in the tapestry was less a person than a collection of ideals, stitched together in thread and fantasy. Nobility was idealized until it became unrecognizable, a dream embroidered into permanence. The illusions were endless. Necks were elongated until they seemed almost swan-like, a gesture meant to suggest refinement and elegance. Skin was smoothed to porcelain perfection, untouched by pores, scars, or the sun. Eyes were painted wide and luminous, as though gazing always into the divine. Even the settings whispered of virtue, books placed in laps to suggest learning, dogs curled at feet to symbolize loyalty, flowers blooming around them to imply purity. Every element was chosen with care, not to capture truth but to enforce a vision. And yet, what was the cost of these perfect fictions? For those who lived under their shadow, the impact was suffocating. You looked at art and then at yourself, and the gap between the two became a wound. If the lady in the manuscript glowed with divine serenity, what did it mean when your own face reflected fatigue, blemishes, or age? If tapestries displayed women who were both impossibly delicate and eternally serene, how could any real woman hope to measure up? Art did not simply decorate walls, it carved expectations into the minds of all who saw it. You close the manuscript, the painted woman vanishing as though she never existed. But her face lingers in your thoughts, its impossible perfection pressing against your memory. Art taught you to hate your reflection. It taught you to measure yourself against ideals that were never meant to be attainable, ideals crafted with pigment and thread rather than flesh and bone. Your eyes lower to the ground, to the weight carried by your own body. It is not your face that troubles you now, but something humbler, more easily overlooked. You shift your stance, your slippers creaking faintly against the stone floor, and you realize that even the smallest part of you, the feet that carry you, was not immune from judgment. You bend to fasten the thin leather straps of your slippers, pulling them snug across your instep. The shoes pinch as you tighten them, the pressure forcing your toes closer together than they'd like. You glance down and murmur to yourself, half a reminder, half a warning. Your toes must be dainty. Even here, hidden beneath fabric and dust, beauty must obey its rules. In the medieval imagination, feet were not forgotten. They too carried the burden of beauty. Small, arched feet were signs of refinement, proof that you did not labor in the fields or tramp through mud. Tiny steps implied grace, as though your very gait was elevated above the earth. A long stride was rustic. A broad foot betrayed a peasant's life. But a dainty foot? That was poetry. Indeed, some poets made it literal. Lady Sophia of Aragon was praised not for her voice, her wit, or her virtue, but for her slippers. "Her shoes are poems," wrote one admirer, "delicate verses stitched in silk, her steps as gentle as lines of love." A peculiar compliment, and yet one that reflected a society where even the smallest extremity could be exalted or condemned. To meet this ideal, women endured a number of peculiar rituals. Slippers were made deliberately tight, designed less for comfort than for shape. Leather or silk squeezed toes into neat alignment, training the foot to appear narrower over time. For long hours of wear, the discomfort grew into pain, but a lady bore it with a smile. Pain, after all, was already woven into the fabric of beauty. Odor, too, became a battlefield. Feet confined in close shoes for long days were rarely fresh, and so herbal remedies were pressed into service. Baths of rosemary, thyme, or lavender were prepared to soak tired feet, their scents masking what lingered beneath. Some even stuffed dried petals into their slippers, releasing fragrance with every step, a trick to convince others that beauty carried no effort, no sweat, no strain. Yet beneath these rituals lay unease. You feel it now as you rise, the pinch of the shoes sharpening into an ache. How strange that a part of the body designed for movement should be prized only for its stillness, its delicacy, its refusal to bear weight like the feet of laborers. Beauty demanded you walk lightly, slowly, gracefully, even when your bones protested. Your feet ache, but beauty walks on. You take a tentative step, then another, the stone floor unforgiving beneath thin soles. With each stride, the pinch deepens, until your movements are less a walk than a delicate performance. As if your shoes choreograph your every step. You know that tomorrow your skin will blister, but tonight, at least, the illusion holds. Straightening, you gather your gown and prepare to leave your chamber. The slippers bite with every shift of weight, and yet you know you cannot remove them. To do so would break the performance, would reveal the hidden cost of daintiness. So you walk on, limping slightly, preparing yourself for the next ritual of the day. For beauty is never one act, it is an exhausting routine, renewed again and again with every dawn. The first light of dawn slips through the shutters, pale and thin, and you open your eyes with a sigh that feels older than your years. Dawn means another day of performance, you whisper, already aware of what awaits you. The day does not begin with rest or reflection, but with the endless labor of becoming beautiful, the daily rehearsal for an audience that never stops watching. The routine starts with cleansing, though the word feels generous for what it truly is. A basin of cold water stings your skin awake, followed by vinegar rinses meant to strip away oils and tighten pores. The sour scent lingers, sharp enough to sting your nose, yet it is praised for leaving the face pale and firm. Your maid dabs your cheeks with linen, blotting as though she is polishing marble rather than tending to flesh. Then comes the painting. A paste of chalk and herbs is smoothed across your face, its texture chalky and uncomfortable, filling lines you barely knew you had. A touch of berry tint brightens the eyes, a dusting of powder dulls any shine. Layer upon layer, the mask is built, transforming skin into canvas, hiding imperfections beneath a fragile crust. You wonder how many years of life are stolen by this ritual, each stroke of powder both an addition and an erasure. Your hair is next, combed until your scalp stings, then drawn back into tight braids. Strands are pinned, yanked, hidden beneath veils or hoods until your head aches. Some women soak their hair in vinegar or wine for sheen, others in saffron for color. But whatever the method, the result is rarely comfort. Beauty insists on severity, and your scalp throbs as the pins dig deeper. The gown weights like armor, its weight daunting. Heavy fabric layered upon heavy fabric, skirts stiff with embroidery, sleeves cut long and dragging. Your maid laces the bodice tight, pulling until your breath comes short. Each tug narrows your waist, sharpens your posture, and steals another fragment of ease. When the final knot is tied, you stand straighter, not from pride, but from necessity. Breathing itself has become a discipline. You think of Lady Philippa, remembered less for her words than for the spectacle of her daily preparation. Chronicles claim her maids began their work before sunrise, spending hours arranging her hair, powdering her skin, and fastening her gowns until she was a walking emblem of nobility. The court admired her beauty, but few thought of the women kneeling at her feet, or of Philippa herself, trapped beneath fabrics and powders, her body sculpted into exhaustion. At last, you catch your reflection. The face looking back is not entirely your own, paler, smoother, sharper. The illusion is convincing, but you feel the cost in every ache of your scalp, every pinch of your shoes, every shallow breath. Beauty is a job with no rest. It demands early mornings, long hours, and endless adjustments, as though you are both laborer and product. Still, you straighten your shoulders and gather your skirts. The performance must continue, for today, like every day, will judge you by its opening act. With the final veil pinned in place, you step toward the great hall. The feast awaits, and with it, the watchful eyes that measure every gesture, every breath, every flawless lie. The great hall opens before you in a blaze of torchlight and chatter, the air thick with the scent of roasted meats, spiced wine, and sweat hidden beneath perfumes. You gather your gown in careful folds and step forward, each movement measured, rehearsed, perfected. All eyes measure your grace, you remind yourself, feeling the weight of 100 gazes even before they fall upon you. A feast is never just a meal. It is a stage, a pageant, a theater where beauty and virtue are performed with the same precision as music and dance. Every guest is both participant and spectator, eyes darting across the tables not only to judge the food or the musicians, but to evaluate each face, each gesture, each gown. For women especially, the hall is not a place to eat or rest. It is a place to prove. History remembers Queen Eleanor of Aragon, not for her appetite, but for the radiance she brought to banquets. Chroniclers wrote of how she shone at feasts, her presence brighter than the torches themselves. She sat with a posture so refined it was described as the language of grace. Her smile a whisper of serenity, her gestures careful enough to inspire awe without seeming practiced. Eleanor's success was not measured by her words, but by her flawless performance of beauty, her ability to embody virtue while seated among power. You try now to summon that same precision. You sip from your goblet, barely wetting your lips, for to drink too deeply would be coarse, unrefined. When food is placed before you, you touch it sparingly, taking small, delicate bites as though appetite itself were unbecoming. Your smile is faint, a fleeting curve that suggests warmth without revealing too much. Each tilt of your head is calculated, each fold of your hands designed to project serenity. The posture is perhaps the hardest to maintain. Your bodice, laced tight, forces you upright, ribs pressed into stillness. Breathing is shallow, controlled, each inhale a reminder of the fabric's grip. To slouch would be ruinous, to stretch impossible. So you hold yourself like a statue, carved into perfection, aching beneath the stone mask of poise. And all the while, the gazes never cease. Some measure your beauty against others seated nearby. Some compare you to saints and paintings, whispering of resemblance or lack thereof. Some weigh your gestures as though they reveal secrets of your soul. You feel yourself dissected, piece by piece, your every move converted into meaning by those eager to judge. You're a statue, watched and weighed. The thought grows heavier as the night stretches on, the noise of laughter and song swirling around you while you remain fixed in your role. Yet somewhere within the stillness, a spark of pride flickers. You are playing the part flawlessly. Your mask has not slipped, your grace has not faltered. The performance, however suffocating, is a triumph in its own way. As the feast continues, you hold your posture, your faint smile intact, but your mind drifts beyond the hall. You begin to wonder what it means that beauty is always a performance, always a mask. Is it obedience? Is it survival? Or is it something deeper, something designed to keep you in place? With that question stirring, you sit poised, the performance unbroken, but your thoughts wandering into darker reflections. The feast winds down, and as the music softens, a priest rises to give a short sermon. His voice carries over the clatter of dishes and fading laughter, steady and assured. Beauty is your duty to God, he proclaims, as though the words were as natural as breathing. The guests nod, some solemnly, some absently, and you feel the phrase burrow into your mind like a thorn. The logic, though cruel, is clear. Beauty is not presented as a gift of self, nor as a joy to be celebrated. It is a duty, a burden carried in service of others. A woman's face was expected to reflect her compliance, her willingness to embody the values pressed upon her: modesty, chastity, obedience. The clearer the skin, the paler the cheeks, the more serene the expression, the more it proved not individuality but conformity. Beauty was never about who you were. It was about how well you mirrored what you were told to be. You think of Christine de Pizan, the writer who dared to challenge such ideas with her pen. At the turn of the 15th century, She argued that women's worth should not be tied to their appearance or silence, but to their wisdom, their talents, their capacity for reason. Her words were radical, her defiance sharp, but her very need to write them proved the point. The system had bound women so tightly to beauty as obedience that resistance was seen as heresy. She lived in a world where to argue that women were more than their painted faces was revolutionary. The system was relentless. A woman could serve her household faithfully, raise children, pray with devotion, and still find herself judged not by her actions, but by her complexion, her posture, her compliance with fashion's dictates. A wrinkle might negate years of piety. A stray hair could unravel a reputation. Even kindness or intelligence could be overlooked if the face presenting them was deemed plain. Beauty was not only the standard, it was the leash. The more you think, the clearer the trap becomes. Your face was never yours to own. From the moment you were born, it was marked as a canvas for others. Your family, your suitors, your society, even your church. If it pleased them, it proved your virtue. If it faltered, it exposed your supposed failings. It was never about how you felt when you looked in the mirror. It was about how others felt when they looked at you. A quiet heat rises in your chest, a blend of sorrow and anger. You sit poised, the faint smile still on your lips, but inside you are trembling with questions. Why must beauty be a cage dressed as holiness? Why must obedience wear the mask of grace? And why should your worth rest on skin and bone instead of spirit and thought? The priest's sermon drifts into blessing. The hall murmurs, "Amen," and the performance resumes. But you no longer hear the words as before. Instead, you feel the stirrings of something dangerous, something liberating. For the first time, you consider that beauty might not only be a duty, it might also be a choice, and choices, even small ones, can become rebellion. Your fingers drift to the edge of your veil, tugging gently until the fabric loosens just enough for air to touch your temple. A lock of hair slips free, catching the glow of a nearby torch. It is the smallest gesture, invisible to most, but to you it feels like a crack of light breaking through stone. A small act feels like freedom. For some women, rebellion was not shouted. It was whispered through fabric and gesture. Subtle defiance lived in the way a veil was pinned a fraction looser, how eyes met a gaze instead of lowering, how a gown shimmered with a color technically reserved for a higher rank. These were not open revolts, but quiet signals, coded messages that declared, "I am more than what you demand of me." History remembers Caterina of Siena, who dared to weave threads of forbidden color into her attire. While others clung to regulation hues, she let a streak of crimson or violet announce itself in her garments, a challenge so small it could be dismissed as accident, but bold enough to spark whispers. Her choices carried risk, for even colors were guarded by law, yet they also carried power, the power to remind others that rules could be bent, even under watchful eyes. Others chose rebellion in expression rather than clothing. A wimple worn slightly loose could reveal a sliver of hair, subtle yet provocative. A glance held too long could unsettle, shifting the balance of power in a conversation. Even words became weapons, with women slipping sharp wit into otherwise polite exchanges, their intelligence revealed only to those clever enough to notice. These acts did not overthrow the system, but they planted cracks in its facade, carving small spaces where individuality could breathe. You tilt your head, catching the eye of a passing nobleman. Instead of lowering your gaze as custom dictates, you hold it just long enough for him to falter before you look away. The moment is fleeting, but it leaves its mark. That tiny victory fuels something within you, a reminder that beneath the layers of linen and powder, you still carry a self unbroken by expectation. Yet hope walks hand in hand with risk. For every Caterina who dared, there were others who paid dearly. A bold color could lead to fines, a sharp glance to accusations of vanity, a loosened veil to whispers of sin. Defiance could cost reputation, safety, even life. You know the dangers intimately, but still, the temptation lingers. To To remain silent is suffocating. To rebel is perilous. Between the two lies only a narrow path, one you tread with caution. The hall around you hums with laughter and music, but you feel your heart beat differently now, louder, sharper. You are not only a performer, you are a participant in a game of symbols, a game where even the smallest gesture can alter meaning. You straighten your gown, resolve coiling quietly within you. For now, your rebellion is only a loosened veil, a bold glance, but it is enough to remind you that the script is not absolute, and as you step away from the crowd, a mirror glimmers faintly in the torchlight. You pause, noticing once more the fine lines at your eyes, the shadows beneath your skin. Emboldened though you feel, the truth of time cannot be ignored. Aging waits, steady and certain, demanding its own reckoning. Your hand lifts to your cheek, fingertips brushing against the faint line that time has carved there. It is small, hardly visible in the flickering candlelight, yet to you it feels immense. Time rewrites your face. You murmur, as if naming the wrinkle might slow its spread. In the mirror's dim reflection, your skin no longer gleams as it once did, and the pale mask of youth seems to slip no matter how tightly you try to hold it. In this world, beauty was never built to last. Youth was its currency, and once that wealth began to fade, the value of a woman seemed to fade with it. Aging brought with it a kind of silence, a slow erasure from the stage of admiration. To grow older was to become invisible, or worse, to be feared as something unnatural, a reminder of decay. You recall the story of widow Agnes, whose face once drew attention at feasts, but who found herself ignored as the years passed. Yet invisibility did not destroy her, it transformed her. She learned to wield silence as power, becoming a quiet advisor in noble households. Behind her veil she listened, unseen, gathering knowledge. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of wisdom rather than beauty. Though her youth was gone, she carved a new kind of influence, invisible to those too blind to look past the surface. Many women turned to small strategies to soften the loss. Simple dresses, modest colors, and layers of veils allowed them to step aside from comparison, to cloak themselves in roles other than the decorative. Their beauty became less about the face they once painted and more about the networks they built, the advice they offered, the subtle power they exercised in corners rather than on stages. The very invisibility that silenced them also shielded them, giving them space to endure where younger women burned too brightly and too briefly. You study your reflection once more and find sorrow in the lines, yes, but also a strange resilience. For all the years of painted skin, pinched shoes, and laced bodices, you are still here. Time has rewritten your face, but it has not erased you. Perhaps this wrinkle is not a mark of loss but of survival, proof that you have endured what so many could not. Still, there is grief. The gaze that once lingered now passes over you, drawn instead to fresher faces. You feel both the relief of escape and the sting of abandonment. Yet as the hall fills with the laughter of youth, you realize you no longer need to compete in that endless performance. There is power in stepping away, in wearing the veil not as a cage, but as a curtain that conceals your strength until you choose to reveal it. You pull your shawl closer, allowing the shadows to soften your features. The ache of invisibility remains, but so too does the quiet spark of resilience. You are not gone. You have simply become harder to see. And sometimes, in a world so obsessed with appearances, invisibility is the strongest shield of all. With that thought, you rise, carrying the weight of years with dignity, and step into the cool night air. In the distance, the bells of a nearby chapel toll softly, guiding you toward a saint's shrine, where another form of beauty, ethereal, untouchable, awaits. You kneel on the cold stone floor, the air heavy with incense and whispers. Before you lies a glass reliquary, its frame gilded with gold, its contents both holy and unsettling. Inside rests a body, once a woman, now a saint, her bones dressed in fine lace, her skull crowned with flowers that have long since dried and crumbled. Her bones are dressed in lace, you whisper, the words half prayer, half disbelief. To the faithful, this is not a corpse, but a vision of sanctity. Saintly bodies were believed to be preserved by divine favor, proof that holiness transcended decay. Pilgrims traveled miles to kneel before such relics, drawn as much by awe as by curiosity. For them, the sight of smooth skin that resisted time, or bones arranged in patterns of reverence, was more than a marvel. It was evidence of God's blessing. You think of Saint Cecilia, whose body was said to lie incorrupt, her face serene in death, as though merely asleep. Crowds gathered to glimpse her, to breathe the air of her resting place, to believe that such perfection could be eternal. Artists painted her with glowing skin, her posture a hymn to purity, her lifeless form elevated into an unattainable beauty that no living woman could ever match. In her silence, she became a standard none could defy. But the truth, seen up close, is stranger and more uncomfortable. The lace that adorns these bones cannot disguise what they are. The jeweled crown cannot soften the hollow sockets of the skull. What was once a body that laughed, a body that suffered, is now arranged as a tableau of divine artifice. You find yourself caught between reverence and unease. It is beautiful, yes, but it is also voyeurism, staring at death dressed as devotion. The obsession with saintly corpses carried its own logic. If a body resisted decay, it must be pure, beloved by God. Preservation equaled virtue, while corruption equaled sin. The living, already burdened by beauty's endless demands, now faced one more impossible standard, that even in death, they must remain flawless. Death itself was not escape but performance, the final pose of beauty frozen in time. You shift uncomfortably, eyes tracing the folds of lace around brittle bones. How many women, you wonder, prayed not only for salvation, but for beauty that would endure even into the grave? How many imagined their remains dressed and displayed, admired by strangers who never knew the life behind the skin? The thought chills you more than the cold stone beneath your knees. Still, you bow your head, caught in the pull of awe. The air seems to vibrate with reverence, the murmurs of pilgrims rising like a tide. Yet beneath it all, you feel the deeper truth, that beauty has pursued women even here, into the silence of death. Rising slowly, you leave the reliquary behind. The image of jeweled bones lingers, etched into your thoughts. As you walk toward the chapel's dim light, you notice paintings adorning the walls, serene faces, flawless forms, beauty perfected not only in relics but in art. And you realize that the saints were not alone in being idealized. The painters, too, had their role in shaping impossible visions. You pause before a gilded frame, the candlelight catching the sheen of paint on wood. A woman gazes back at you, serene, unblemished, untouchable. Her skin is luminous, her features symmetrical, her expression composed as though the chaos of life never touched her. "She's flawless but not real," you murmur, the words slipping out before you can stop them. Portraits like saints' relics were not meant to tell the truth. They were meant to sell an idea. The brush of the artist did not merely capture. It corrected, improved, erased. A woman's scars vanished beneath strokes of pale pigment. Her wrinkles softened into smoothness. Her eyes brightened until they glowed with an impossible purity. A portrait was not a likeness. It was a lie elevated into permanence. Consider Lady Isabella, whose face bore the faint marks of childhood illness. In life, they were visible reminders of frailty, whispered about behind fans and sleeves. Yet in her portrait, the scars disappeared. Her cheeks glowed like polished marble, her lips curved in modest perfection. To look at the painting was to see not Isabella, but the Isabella others wanted. The Isabella made to fit ideals that flesh had refused to grant, and it was not only faces that were altered. Symbols crowded the canvas, each one a coded message. A lily at her side meant purity, even if gossip told other stories. A small dog curled at her feet declared loyalty, though marriages were often forged more from power than love. A book in her hand suggested learning, though it mattered little whether the subject herself could read. These tokens shaped perception as much as the smoothened features did, instructing the viewer on what to believe, regardless of truth. For the women themselves, these portraits became both honor and burden. To be painted was a mark of status, a way to secure memory. Yet the image became a standard to uphold, a ghost that haunted the living. Every time Isabella entered a hall, people compared her to the portrait, weighing her flesh against the painted lie. A shadow stretched before her, always more beautiful, always more virtuous, always more perfect than she could ever be. You linger before the painted face, torn between admiration and resentment. The artistry is undeniable. The sweep of color, the delicate shading, the luminous skin that seems to glow in the dim hall. But beneath the admiration simmers anger, sharp and bitter. How many women spent their lives chasing the shadow of these portraits, desperate to live up to a version of themselves that had never truly existed? You chase a shadow you'll never catch. The thought settles heavily in your chest. Beauty was always a pursuit, always slipping just out of reach, its finish line redrawn with every new standard, every fresh illusion. Even in art, it was never about the woman. It was about the story others wanted her to tell. You turn away from the portrait, your own reflection catching faintly in the polished glass. For a moment, you see yourself as both subject and spectator, performer and audience. The painted lies of portraits echo in your mind as you prepare to leave the hall, bracing for the next act of your daily performance. The endless theater of beauty that begins anew with every dawn. The morning comes again, pale light creeping through shutters as though reluctant to intrude. You rise with the same heaviness in your limbs, the same dull ache in your chest. Before you lies the basin, the powders, the pins, the fabrics, each one a reminder of the part you must play. Another day, another mask, you whisper, your voice flat with fatigue. The cycle is merciless. It begins with cleansing, sharp vinegar biting at your skin, then paste spread thin across your face to craft the illusion of flawlessness. Your hair is tugged into braids until your scalp burns, every strand forced into place whether it wills it or not. Then comes the bodice, drawn tight by steady hands until your ribs bruise beneath its grip, until even breathing becomes a discipline. The gown follows, heavy and layered, its weight pressing you deeper into exhaustion before the day has even begun. At court, the story of Lady Beatrice circulates like legend. Her beauty, they say, was not born but built, sculpted by hours of labor each dawn. Servants began before the sun itself, weaving her hair into golden coils, dusting her skin with powders, lacing her gowns until her body was no longer her own. Admirers spoke of her radiance, her effortless poise, her grace. Few spoke of the pain that shadowed her every step. Few cared to ask. You feel the same toll written into your body. Your scalp remains sore long after the braids are pinned. Your ribs ache from yesterday's lacing, bruises hidden beneath silk and linen. Your skin stings beneath layers of powder and paste, the irritation masked by the illusion of smoothness. Every movement is practiced, calculated, rehearsed. The smile, the posture, the stillness, all repeated until performance consumes reality. Beauty is a chain you wear daily. Unlike jewelry, it cannot be removed when the evening ends. It clings to you, demanding fresh effort every dawn, its links forged from powders, fabrics, and the relentless gaze of others. You carry it with every step, every glance, every breath you struggle to take in tight stays. And though the chain glitters in the eyes of those who admire you, it weighs heavier with each passing day. As you sit before the mirror, your reflection stares back, hollowed by fatigue, made strange by the layers of artifice. For a moment you wonder if this cycle has an end. Will the chain fall away in age, as it did for Widow Agnes, leaving only invisibility? Or will it bind you even in death, like the saintly corpses displayed behind glass, their beauty staged for eternity? You close your eyes, the ache of weariness sinking deep. Somewhere in that darkness, a flicker of defiance stirs. Perhaps the cycle cannot be broken, but within it, you can still dream. Dreams of loosening the laces, of washing away the powders, of breathing freely beneath the weight of no one's gaze. dreams of stepping beyond the chain, if only in sleep. With that thought, you let your head rest against the chair, the morning preparations still unfinished. The world will demand its performance soon enough, but for now, in the quiet of your chamber, you drift into a weary dream, a fragile freedom, brief, but yours alone. You lie in bed, the heavy layers of your gown finally loosened, your hair unpinned at last. It spills across the pillow in tangles, a wildness you would never dare reveal in the hall. Your eyes drift shut, and sleep pulls you gently into its embrace. You dream of unbound hair. The thought hums, soft as a lullaby. In your dream, there are no pins, no veils, no powders. You walk through a meadow barefoot, the earth cool beneath your soles, and no one calls you vulgar for it. The sun touches your skin, warming it into bronze, and no whispers follow. Your laughter rises, loud and unrestrained, echoing across the open air, and no one silences you with a raised brow. You are simply human, unmasked, unjudged, unmeasured. The dream grows brighter, and with it, the vision of a world where beauty is not a cage, but a choice. Here, women do not weigh their worth against the curve of their cheekbones or the paleness of their skin. Here, no one praises fragility or worships silence. Instead, strength is celebrated, voices are honored, and the lines carved by time are seen not as shame but as stories. You think of Hildegard of Bingen, the abbess who lived centuries ago yet dared to speak her truth boldly. She did not fit the mold of silent womanhood, and still her visions, her music, her writings reshaped the world around her. Hildegard's beauty was not measured in symmetry or skin, but in the courage to let her voice rise. She becomes part of your dream, a figure cloaked not in powders and jewels, but in words and song, radiant in a way no portrait could ever capture. In this imagined world, there are no sumptuary laws to dictate your colors, no whispers to weigh your laughter, no chain of daily rituals to bind your body. You eat when you are hungry, you rest when you are tired. You grow older without shame, your hair silvering like moonlight, your wrinkles celebrated as the maps of a life fully lived. You are no longer a statue, no longer a shadow of a painted lie. You are yourself. The question lingers in the quiet glow of the dream. Could you be enough as you are? The thought both soothes and unsettles you, for it offers a freedom you have never known, a freedom that feels dangerous precisely because it is possible. To be enough without powders or laces, without bruises or silence, what a rebellion that would be. The dream lingers as morning begins to press at the edges of your mind, reminding you that the world you must wake to is not the one you have just wandered through. And yet, as you stir, you carry a fragment of it with you. The laughter, the bare feet, the unbound hair. A vision of what could be, what perhaps one day might be, or at least what you can hold within yourself. You open your eyes to the dim chamber, the chain of beauty still waiting for you. But now, somewhere inside, hope has taken root. And as you rise, you sense that the performance of beauty does not end in the past. It echoes forward, into worlds beyond your own. A faint glow lights your face, not from torch or candle, but from a small device cradled in your hand. You scroll without thinking, the images flickering past like pages in an endless manuscript. Faces appear, flawless and luminous, each one softened by filters that erase blemishes, smooth wrinkles, narrow jaws. Filters mimic medieval lies, you think, startled by the familiarity. The painted portraits of centuries past have simply been reborn in pixels. The parallels are too sharp to ignore. Just as medieval beauty was bound to virtue, today's ideals still whisper the same message. To be beautiful is to be worthy, to be pure, to be good. Advertisements promise clean beauty, products that wash away imperfection as though sin itself clings to your skin. Words like natural and flawless echo the language of purity, recycling the same equation of body and morality that shaped your ancestors' lives. Scrolling further, you see the modern saints and courtesans, influencers, actors, models. Their skin glows with effortless perfection, Their hair falls in immaculate waves. Their smiles reveal teeth too white to be real. They post images of themselves sipping green juices or meditating, as if thinness and serenity were not only beautiful, but also proof of discipline, proof of virtue. Behind the curtain lies the same performance, rituals, edits, sacrifices, but the audience is wider now, the scrutiny constant. It is no different from the noble courts of old. Youth remains the currency, fragility still the prize. Makeup is designed to look invisible, a lie so subtle it pretends to be truth. Skin must glow without shine, lips must curve without shouting, bodies must appear effortless even when they are sculpted by labor and hunger. The medieval mask of chalk and arsenic has been replaced by serums and filters, but the chain remains. You pause staring at your reflection in the black screen when it idles. Your face, unfiltered, looks back. Lines where you've smiled, shadows where you've lived. And in that moment you hear it, the whisper of medieval rules carried across centuries. Pale is still praised, thin is still worshipped, youth is still exalted above wisdom. The technology is new, but the voice is old, as ancient as the painted saints and jeweled corpses you once imagined kneeling before. The mirror still whispers medieval rules. That realization settles heavy, but it also sharpens something inside you. For if the lies have survived this long, so too can resistance. You set the device aside, its glow fading, and turn back to your own reflection. Not a portrait, not a filtered screen, but a face alive with its imperfections. You breathe deeply, ribs expanding freely without laces or stays, and let your gaze soften. For centuries, beauty has been wielded as obedience, as performance, as trap. But knowing that history gives you power, the power to see the pattern, the power to step aside from it, even if only in small ways, your reflection remains yours alone. And as you touch the glass, you carry forward not just the weight of medieval echoes, but the choice to answer them differently. The performance may still surround you, but now you are aware, and awareness is its first undoing. Water runs cool across your skin, and with each splash the mask dissolves. The powders, the pastes, the faint traces of yesterday's performance slip away, spiraling down into nothing. The paint falls, revealing you. The mirror fogs with steam, and for the first time in what feels like centuries, the face that looks back is not a stranger sculpted for others' eyes, but simply your own. It is here, in this quiet moment, that something shifts. The weight of centuries of rules, veils, powders, fasting, laces, whispers, sits behind you, not upon you. The mirror no longer commands, but listens. You no longer ask what others will see, what they will judge, what they will praise or condemn. You ask instead, what do I see? What do I claim as mine? History has always offered chains disguised as crowns. Beauty was virtue, beauty was duty, beauty was proof of obedience. But to step outside that circle is to reclaim more than your reflection. It is to reclaim your very self. Christine de Pizan, centuries ago, dared to write of women's worth beyond their bodies, of their wisdom, their strength, their spirit. She placed pen to parchment and carved space for truths the mirror could not contain. Her courage whispers to you now, you are more than their canvas. You lift the cloth and pat your skin dry. No chalk, no saffron, no clove oil hides what remains. The lines by your eyes are not flaws but stories. The curves and angles of your face are not errors but maps of a life lived. To choose comfort over contortion, authenticity over disguise, is to defy an empire of expectation. In every breath that is free, in every step unshackled by laces, in every glance that belongs only to you, rebellion takes form. There is power in softness, not the feigned fragility of a courtly feint, but the softness of being whole. There is strength in refusing the rituals that strip you bare, in saying enough when centuries have demanded more. You no longer need to be pale as the moon, thin as a reed, bowed as a saint. You need only be alive, and alive you are. The mirror watches, but you do not flinch. You see not obedience, not sin, not perfection, but a face alight with freedom. You are not waiting for whispers of approval, nor dreading the hiss of judgment. You belong to yourself, in this moment, entirely. You lean closer, not to adjust or correct, but to meet your own gaze. For the first time, it feels less like inspection and more like recognition. The centuries of performance fade into echoes, and what remains is a simple, profound truth. You are enough. You set the mirror aside and sink into stillness. No veil, no perfume, no ritual waits. The chains of beauty's tyranny lie broken on the floor, forgotten. You rest in peace, not the peace of surrender, but the peace of reclamation. And in that quiet, your reflection finally smiles back. The flame trembles once, then bends to your breath. A thin wisp of smoke rises, curling into the rafters as the room sinks into darkness. The dark feels like home. The silence that follows is not heavy but gentle, wrapping around you like a quilt. For the first time, there is no mask to hold, no posture to maintain, no eyes measuring you from across a hall. Only the quiet and the truth you carry within it. You think of the path that brought you here, the long march through shadowed chambers of history, where beauty was a cage made of powders, needles, fasting, and whispers. You remember the pain of scraped scalps, of skin burned by lie, of ribs squeezed until breath became a luxury. You recall the portraits that lied, the sermons that bound, the gossip that condemned. All those rules, spoken and unspoken, weighed down generation after generation until the chains seemed natural, inevitable. And yet, you also remember the flickers of defiance, women who painted outside the lines, who loosened veils, who dared to laugh when silence was demanded. You remember saints whose frailty became holiness, but also thinkers who proclaimed another truth. That worth is not drawn on skin, not sewn into gowns, not confined to the shape of a body. It is carried in the soul, unmeasured, untamed. Now the journey shifts. From those dim halls of medieval fear, you have walked into the mirror of today, where screens and filters echo the same old lies in new disguises. But you are no longer captive to them. You have seen too much, learned too well. You know the pattern, and knowing it loosens its hold. So let this be your quiet rebellion. Love yourself beyond the mirror's lies. Refuse the weight of impossible standards, whether painted by medieval hands or coded into modern algorithms. Wear what pleases you. Rest when you need. Eat when you hunger. Speak when silence would suffocate. Choose to live, not to perform. And now, dear listener, let me leave you here in peace. Thank you for walking this tale with me, through shadows and poisons, through veils and whispers, through centuries of chains and sparks of resistance. Thank you for letting the echoes of the past brush against your own reflection tonight. Sleep well. As you drift toward dreams, remember one final truth. Beauty doesn't own you. You are enough. No candle, no crown, no mirror can change that. The world may still whisper its rules, but tonight you have learned the art of answering with silence. You close your eyes. The dark holds you, not as an enemy but as a friend. The weight of expectation slides away, and the stillness becomes a balm. You breathe, deeply, freely, your chest rising without corsets, your skin bare of poisons, your spirit unchained. Slowly, softly, you surrender to rest, not as a statue, not as a saint, not as a portrait, but simply as yourself. And in that freedom, you sleep,